Carl Jung's Modern Man in Search of a Soul is a collection of essays based on his lectures that outline his insights into the human psyche. To me, among these, the chapter titled The Archaic Man stood out as particularly relevant to understanding the state of the modern man and the world today. Before I start, I should clarify that archaic man is a term that Jung uses to describe individuals from tribal or forest-dwelling societies, but broadly speaking, any society that adopts a more symbolic, mystical, or a profoundly spiritual view of reality. According to Jung, the archaic man is one that views the world primarily through a lens of myths and symbols, and may attribute meaning to every natural phenomena. For example, to the archaic man, a thunderstorm isn't simply a weather phenomena, but instead the anger of gods. In contrast, the so-called modern man prides himself on being rational and evidence-based, driven by science and logic. But Jung points out that this conceptualization represents a false dichotomy, and that the two are not as different as they seem. What he is arguing is that beneath their apparent differences, archaic man and the modern man share the same fundamental psychic processes. So I want to explore what Jung meant, why it matters, and how it can shape our understanding of ourselves and the world. So Jung describes how archaic societies often imbued certain individuals with mana, a supernatural quality that made them larger than life. These figures, be they tribal leaders, shamans, or warriors, were seen as possessing extraordinary power or wisdom. This psychological tendency to elevate individuals persists in modern society and the world around us today. You can think of how modern leaders, politicians, or CEOs, celebrities, are often idealized. You can consider the cult-like adoration or disparagement of figures like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk, or certain political leaders. In many cases, instead of a non-emotional discourse about their achievements or failures, discussions surrounding these figures is often, once again, colored with a mythical element, as though they alone hold the key to solving society's problems or to destroying it. Jung would say that this is archetypical thinking at work, the projection of collective hopes and desires and fears onto individuals. The danger here is that such projections blind us to the fallibility or the humanness of these figures, leading to disillusionment when they inevitably fail to meet our exaggerated expectations. Secondly, I believe this dynamic can also foster a sense of dependency, which can leave people waiting for saviors instead of seeking solutions collectively or through individual responsibility and action. So based on Jung's insight, we can argue that the modern man's reliance on rationality often blinds him to the irrational forces within his own psyche. While science-based technologies have given us an unprecedented control over our environment, it has done little or had almost no effect on the influence of our unconscious mind. You can think of how modern anxieties often take symbolic forms, so fears of technological domination or climate catastrophes or pandemics are often expressed in very apocalyptic terms, resembling the world-ending predictions or in the stories of archaic societies. For example, it's not hard to see how discussions of AI's potential to destroy humanity parallels the stories of ancient gods losing control over their own creations. Now, Jung would suggest that these narratives are not just reactions to external events, but in actuality, expressions of unconscious collective and archetypical fears. I believe that it is important to recognize these patterns, as being aware of such tendencies can really help us see through the smoke during real catastrophic events, and maybe help us in being mindful of our own reactions by wanting to address the underlying psychological tensions instead of merely reacting to surface-level anxieties. So Jung highlights how the archaic man often held contradictory beliefs. For example, a tribe might simultaneously believe in the natural death of their elders while also attributing their deaths to malevolent sorcery. These contradictions were not seen as problematic because they reflected the complexity of the life for the archaic man rather than a fundamental or a ideological need for logical consistency. Now, modern man, despite priding himself on rationality, is often just as contradictory. You can see how many people compartmentalize their scientific understanding of their world and their religious or spiritual beliefs. For example, someone might vehemently proclaim that they accept a Newtonian causal view of the universe and perhaps accept biological theories of evolution as a core fact about reality, thereby showcasing great trust in medical science and technologies, but at the same time still hold on to the idea of divine intervention when it comes to human affairs. For example, Jung discusses encounters with tribes where they understood that people can die of natural causes, however, would often attribute deaths to sorcery or evil spells. Similarly, we can often see people with loved ones who are suffering from an ailment or getting treatment in a state-of-the-art hospital often spending resources and energy praying for their recovery. Now, I want to emphasize that these contradictions should not be understood as failures of intellect, but simply just reflections of deeper archaic structures of patterns of behavior. Through this, Jung makes us aware of the fact that our minds have never worked strictly rationally, but instead behavior is almost always filled with apparent paradoxes. I also want to emphasize how this reflects the operations of our belief systems. You see, in the archaic times, belief in the supernatural or the world of the priests or the shamans served as the foundation for understanding the world. People trusted in these figures, outsourcing the magic of interpreting the divine will or their natural phenomena to them. This trust, I would say, was rooted in a shared or collective acknowledgement that such knowledge was beyond the grasp of an ordinary individual. Now, in today's world, the same dynamic persists, but it's redirected towards science and its practitioner. Or let's say their gatekeepers, such as peer-reviewed journals, researchers, institutions, etc. Now, all that has changed is that the magic of understanding the universe is now outsourced to the scientists and experts. Now, most people do not engage directly with the scientific process or may understand its nuances or limitations, but often take its conclusions at face value and go on to build their worldview around these declarations. For example, how many times have you heard people say something like science says or research shows to justify their worldview and to advocate for it? And they can take these findings as a fact not because they've analyzed the data themselves, but because scientific consensus or a published article has suggested it to be so. Consider health-related beliefs, for example. Think about dietary recommendation. So for many years, fats were vilified, with people following low-fat diets. But later, as research evolved, fats became reclassified as essentials and sugars became the primary culprit. Now, despite these shifts, it is very interesting to note how the public trust in the nutritional recommendations, which are coming from the same underlying research publication and knowledge translation or knowledge mobilization process, remains largely preserved. Now, neither Jung or this discussion is advocating for less trust or more skepticism towards scientists or priests for that matter. Instead, the insights here are purely psychological. In both these cases, the individual is relinquishing their agency to an external authority while maintaining a sense of certainty in that authority's views, beliefs, guesses, and proclamations. I believe this illustrates how deeply rooted this psychological process is, one that has transcended temporal, historical, and cultural shifts. So the question is, what do we do with these insights? Now, Jung's account of archaic versus the modern psyche is not merely an academic exercise, but instead, I believe, a call to introspection. It is inviting us to look beneath the surface and understand the deeper psychological patterns that might shape our lives. Secondly, I believe that this is a call for connection and empathy in some way, because this knowledge can help us recognize and appreciate the shared psychological and behavioral roots of humanity, now whether in myths, rituals, or scientific paradigms, and to foster a sense of connection and humility with our past and with other individuals and societies around us. Now, this only happens once we realize that despite differences in cultures or era, we are all grappling with the same existential questions. Thirdly, by indicating how using science or facts to construct our worldview is still essentially, psychologically speaking, symbolicism and mysticism at play, it encourages us to approach our beliefs, now whether ours or others, with a heightened sense of curiosity and understanding, so that instead of outright dismissal or blind acceptance, we can explore the psychological and symbolic significance within them, something that hopefully enriches our own inner life. And as you step away from this video, maybe reflect upon your own relationship with authority or beliefs or meaning. Perhaps question and ponder upon how these insights can help you connect more deeply with yourself and others, and maybe the world. Perhaps in exploring these questions, you are taking one step closer to finding your own soul, as Jung intended.